21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Today, of course, I don't need to go through the reminders. We do this all the time. But we do have, of course, before us here today, Minister McCauley and his officials, because we're going through Supplementary Estimates B 2024-2025. And so pursuant to Standing Order 81.5, the committee will commence consideration of the Supplementary Estimates B 2024-2025, votes 1B, 5B, and 10B under the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, referred to the committee on Monday, November 18th, 2024. As I mentioned, we do have Minister McCauley before us. Thank you, Minister, for your work on behalf of Canadian farmers and your service to the good people of Cardigan and Prince Edward Island. I'll turn it over to you for any opening remarks, and then, of course, we'll go to questions. Colleagues, you might be wondering on timing and my intention. We will do 1 hour with the Minister and his officials, and then, of course, we normally have an additional hour with officials. I think with your blessing, I think we'll probably truncate that to about 30 minutes, so we'll allow for rounds of questions to the officials, but I'll work with you guys accordingly. But Minister, over to you. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be back here with my new Deputy Minister, Minister Henson, and to my right, Tom Rosser, and Robert Iniaro of CFIA. Good to have them here. Like you, I've had a busy few months since I was here. Just a few weeks ago, I traveled to Beijing to advocate for Canadian farmers and producers and highlight Canada as a reliable supplier of high-quality agriculture and food products. Our two countries have significant challenges to work through, but I know you folks met with and speak to stakeholders on a regular basis, so you know just how important that market is to them. Many sectors have been strongly advocating for me to visit since my return to agriculture. In June, I traveled to the World Pork Expo in Iowa and toured an impressive grain mill in Minnesota, which relies on quality and reliable Canadian oats. I was pleased to meet with the government of Iowa and the agricultural secretaries for Iowa and Minnesota to impress the importance of our integrated trade in agriculture. I also look forward to working with my new counterpart, Secretary-elect Rollins, to make sure that our agricultural trade remains strong and integrated to the benefit of both countries. Now, I know the member from Foothills likes to travel to Prince Edward Island, so this summer I thought I'd pop down to his neck of the woods in Calgary just to visit the Stampede. We received a warm welcome, no surprise, from the many folks. That was great to see firsthand and the impressive work being done there. While we were there, we also announced $6 million to help Canadian beef producers grow their market around the world. And just last week, we had a great trip to Regina for Agribition. I was able to meet with my new counterpart in Saskatchewan, Minister Harrison, and attend the burning of the brand and meet many stakeholders. Mr. Chair, over the last few months, we announced over $30 million for 5 research clusters in crops, barley, and bioproducts, organics, and poultry. I'm so pleased to report that the grocery industry is moving towards a grocery code of conduct with the support of all the grocers, with the major grocers. Mr. Chair, I would like to thank all the members of this committee for their work in helping get this code off the ground. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, extreme weather events continue to impact our farmers, and we're working with provinces and territories to help farmers better adapt to the impacts of climate change. But in the meantime, we'll continue to support our farmers when they deal with extreme weather. We have recently partnered with New Brunswick and Quebec to provide up to $47.2 million under the Agri-Recovery to help producers in these provinces with the extraordinary costs due to serious water damage to their crops. I know, Mr. Chair, the members are very eager to ask me about the supplementary estimates, so I'll provide an update before taking the questions. The supplementary estimates for you total of $123 million. This includes nearly $60 million for the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. I'm sure the members of the committee know full well how vital this fund is to providing support for Canadian farmers right across the country. There's $25 million for the Poultry and Egg Farm Investment Program. There's been a lot of talk in the House of Commons lately about supporting our supply-managed farmers. But it's vitally important that we pass the estimates so we can get the funding to them. We also have nearly $20 million to begin the renewal and expansion of the local food infrastructure fund. I know most of the members here support the National School Food Program, and the expansion of this fund will help assist this important program. Mr. Chair, this is just a bit of what the supplementary estimates this year, but I think it shows quite clearly how important it is that we get them passed in the House. I hope members will put politics aside and vote to get the funds out the door so we can keep helping farmers or Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Minister McCauley, and I apologize to officials. I kind of jumped right in with the minister. I didn't introduce you, but thank you again for your work in the ministry and with CFIA. So, colleagues, we will get to questions. You'll notice Stephanie isn't here with us. We have a different clerk who has also given me these handy 30-second, 1-minute things. You know I'm usually very liberal as your chair in giving time, but I will, I guess, signal with these to give you a bit of a sense of keeping you guys in time and in order here today. So we will turn it to questions. We'll get kind of 2 full panels, 3 for the Conservatives, 3 for Liberals, 2 rounds of questions for our Bloc and NDP members. So we'll start with the Conservatives. I presume Mr. Barlow for up to 6 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Barlow.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Minister, you said in your preamble that you were in China to advocate for Canadian agriculture. But the headline in the media when you returned was Canada's agriculture minister given cold shoulder by Chinese government on trip to Beijing. That was the headline after your recent return from that trip. Did you try to secure a meeting with your Chinese counterpart prior to you leaving to Beijing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm certainly, I'm sure my colleague understands how vitally important China is to our export market. And he's also fully aware that we export $11.5 billion to China. And of course, the sectors were advocating quite hard that I make this trip since I came back to agriculture. Now it was a short trip and a quick trip, and it was on and off. It was off, and then the sectors kept pushing, and I made the trip there and met with a number of exporters from this country and a number of importers from China. And there's one thing I did learn.
So, Minister, did you have a meeting with your Chinese counterpart?
When you sell a product to a foreign country, it's vitally important, Mr. Chair, that you follow up with representation. And that is what we did. What we did in China was meet with the people that buy the products from our country.
Okay,
and
thanks.
we want to make sure, Mr.
I have a minute.
Speaker,
You know how this works. I have a limited amount of time. You did not have a meeting with your Chinese counterpart.
I think the way this works, Mr. Chair, he asked the question.
Hold on there, Mr. Minister and Mr. Barlow. I've stopped the clock. You can appreciate as the chair, I want to give the liberty to my honourable colleagues to ask questions. Minister McCauley, I know you want to certainly explain, and we want to give room. But within reason, I'll have to intervene to make sure that we're not having both of you overtalk the translators at the same time. So I would ask, certainly if it's a relatively pointed question, Minister, if you could try to stay relatively pointed, that would be helpful, and we'll try to avoid that overlap. So go ahead, Mr. Drouin.
If the opposition is insinuating that staying in your basement and doing international relations or trade from your basement is a good thing, then they should follow their leadership, and it's a great thing. But in our side, we believe that the minister should show up and actually do the work that needs to be done.
You'll have your 6 minutes. You can talk about that all you want.
So not a point of order. Again, it's a balance here. Don't make my job overly hard here today to everyone. So Mr. Barlow, I have stopped the clock. I'll go back. But again, Minister, certainly we want to hear a bit of an expansive piece on what you're doing, but we have to be mindful of managing time for our colleagues as well. Go ahead, Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. And clearly he did not have a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, so I'm not sure how you're advocating for Canadian agriculture when you can't even get a meeting with your Chinese counterpart, which is put on punishing tariffs on Canadian canola. But, Minister, in 2022, you gave $8.5 million to Aspire Food Group to build a cricket factory that is now in financial trouble. Minister, did you review their business plan before granting the $8.5 million? That's a pretty clear yes or no question.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and of course he indicated quite clearly, and he referred to my Chinese trip before he asked the question, and I again emphasize it's so vitally important. And I know my honourable colleague is very interested in trade to make sure we sell our grain products to China. And in fact, they indicated, the importers indicated so clearly to us, if we're going to sell products, we have to be there. And on the crickets, I certainly appreciate and understand, and where am I here? I understand the question, Mr. Speaker, and of course it was fully evaluated, and I was not the minister at the time, but that makes no difference. It would be fully evaluated by the department and by my ministry, of course, or the Minister of Agriculture. And these decisions are made in that manner. It's evaluated by the department. No, you asked me a question.
Yeah,
so
you answered it. You answered it. You said it was reviewed. So last July, your government forked over another $500,000 to this food group. Is that correct? To Aspire Foods.
I'd have to evaluate exactly what we paid in the last 6 months, a year. But of course, it's an industry that's going through restructuring, as my honourable colleague is fully aware.
Okay, so if that's the case, you know they're restructuring. Why did you give a business that you know is financially struggling another $500,000?
Well, of course, it would have to depend on a business plan. That's how evaluations are made by the department and by the minister. But do you have anything to add on that, Tom?
Just briefly, Minister, maybe just add that there are those starting to grow insects on a commercial scale for protein, principally for the pet food market. These are sort of startup businesses. These are novel things, and there is some risk associated with ventures of that nature.
So the maximum contribution from AFC for the Agri-Innovate program, which this got funding for, it was $5 million, and yet you gave them $8.5 million. So why was this group given an additional $3.5 million over the cap in Agri-Innovate?
Well, Mr. Chair, we'd have to evaluate that situation, but this decision was made on, of course, fully evaluated by the department, and of course, the advice given to the minister, but the decision is made, of course, by the minister.
So you overspent by almost 33%. You gave this company over what the cap is on Agri-Innovate, and you don't know why they were given an additional $3.5 million over the $5 million cap in a failing business?
My honourable colleague, I'll turn it to my deputy, but of course it was evaluated, and I'll turn it to my deputy.
Thank you, Chair. We'll try to come back in this session with the amount on Agri-Innovate. It seems very unlikely to me, and I admit this precedes my time in the department, it seems unlikely to me that we would have exceeded the Agri-Innovate contribution level, but we'll come back to you quickly on that.
Just the company is more than 50% owned by two billionaires, Mr. Riley of Clearwater Seafood and Mr. Lapron. So this is interesting that they were given in excess of the cap. But my final question, Mr. Minister, 3 years ago, your predecessor said she was optimistic the self-imposed ban would be lifted in a couple of weeks on the PEI seed potato ban. Now that's 1,103 days ago, and still that ban is in place. I ran into a number of PEI farmers this week at the Young Farmers event in Alberta, and they all want to know, when is this cap or ban, self-imposed ban on PEI seed potatoes going to be lifted?
So, I thank my honourable colleague for his interest in the seed potato industry in Prince Edward Island, but of course I think he's fully aware why the ban is there. We export over 90% of what we produce in Prince Edward Island. We have to be sure that it meets the requirements of the United States. He understands that we did have a problem with potato wort. And this ban was put in place to make sure that the border stayed open. I think anybody that's exporting potatoes from Prince Edward Island fully understands that and fully supports what's taking place. And I'm sure my honourable colleague does too, because he knows. He knows very well.
The people in PEI certainly do know who's on their side.
Mr. Barlow, you're way at time, and I am going to turn it over to Mr. Drouin.
Yeah, for 30 seconds. Mr. Chair, I am troubled by the questions that were asked about crickets, and I get it. Dr. Leslie Lewin, the conspiracy theorists who wear tinfoil hats, who asks questions about crickets and somehow is convincing Canadians, and the opposition is eating crickets on this, trying to convince that our department is forcing Canadians to eat crickets, Mr. Chair. It is outrageous. It is outrageous. They know it. There's a petition going on online. Their leader of the official opposition has pushed this thing. It is crickets and it is BS. And Mr. Chair, I will cede my time to Mr. Leah Taylor-Roy, who will ask much more intelligent questions that I've heard from the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to Minister McCauley, to Mr. Hansen, and to other people, the rest of you, the witnesses here from Agriculture and CFIA. First, I'd like to thank you, Minister McCauley, for going to China, for supporting Canadian farmers, even though things were tough, and especially when times are tough. We know that supporting our farmers with their buyers in foreign markets is very important. And so going there and really making an effort, those in-person relationships make a big difference, and I know that's something that you excel at. So thank you for doing that. And I wanted to circle a little bit back to the canola farmers, because we know right now it's tough times for them, and going there and trying to talk to things, but to their buyers, but also the government is also helping canola farmers through the clean fuel regulations. And we know when trade is precarious, when times are difficult, it's better to have local markets and to try and develop markets here. And so I think that is also a way we are helping our farmers. But I did want to switch to my questions to the organic sector, actually. I know a couple of months ago, and you just referred to it, that our government made a funding announcement to advance sustainable farming practices in the organic sector. I have a number of constituents who are organic farmers, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit to talk about how you're supporting sustainable farming practices in the organic sector, and what are the specific goals for this funding?
Thank you very much. And of course, it's an important question and a valuable question. And of course, you're fully aware of the organic agricultural sector and how it needs to be increased. And we import organic products from in this country, and we can produce more, and we can be exporting products. There's no doubt. That's why the funding is there, of course, in order to increase and make them more sustainable. But also previously, when I was in the ministry, we helped the organic farmers, the organic standards, which you know all about, and it's so important. And that, I believe, is up again, and we're working with the organic farmers to make sure that they have the standards in place. As you know, there's with the EU and that, to meet the requirements and that, things have to change. But the organic agricultural sector is so vitally important. And it's kind of like the mutton industry, like there's areas of agriculture that we're not producing enough in, and there's an open market for this stuff in this country and outside of the country. That's why we're pushing so hard to increase the sectors and to become more self-reliant, and of course export too, which is so important.
Yeah, the market opportunity is great, and we know that there's a premium paid for organic products, so it also often helps smaller farmers be able to sustain and operate. And I know, talking about the investments you made in Aspire, that as somebody who's been an entrepreneur in small business, knowing that sometimes working capital requirements exceed your earlier expectations, that additional funding is needed to help move forward to get you to scale, to get you to the point. I appreciate that our government has been taking some risks and going into areas that maybe the private sector wouldn't go into. That's the job of government. I would say if we never had a project that failed, we weren't doing our job. Because if we're not taking risks, then who is? And that is what government and innovation should be doing. So I want to thank you for that as well. And now turning briefly over to supply management, poultry and egg on-farm investment fund, which I know you've also been talking about, and there's money here in the supplements. I'm just wondering if you can tell the committee what you've heard from producers about how important the funding allocated to this program in the supplementary estimates is.
Well, of course, being a farmer myself and involved in the supply management sector, I'm fully aware of the value of supply management itself and the efforts that's been made in the House to make sure it remains secure. As you know, we initiated the supply management program over 50 years ago and been involved in it, and I'm fully aware. The egg industry, of course, along with every other agricultural sector in the country, needs to expand and continue to expand, and that is why that funding is there, in order for them to help to increase their production. Simply that, because we don't want to have to import the products when we want to make sure we produce them ourselves. And also firm credit, as you're no doubt aware, is now making moves to make more venture capital available. And you're right, if every venture capital dollar is returned, then we didn't do enough of a venture. We didn't, venture capital is meant to take some risk. Of course, with some evaluation of the programs too, but we want to make sure that that is done, and I'm certainly pleased with Farm Credit and being able to do this. They'll be able to hit many sectors, the supply management sector and many other sectors in agriculture, which is so vitally needed.
Thank you. And I think that's the difference between entrepreneurs and journalists, is that people who have been there understand it, and people who write about it don't necessarily.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're at time, and I haven't got into the cards because we're not used to that tradition here in this committee. Monsieur Parent, allez-y, 6 minutes.
Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And, of course, Mr. Minister, we'll get right into it because I have a lot of questions, so some brief questions would be appreciated so that we could cover the most topics possible. Mr. Minister, the duck industry, we are encountering some difficulties right now. Mr. Yaniro can expand on that, and we can maybe talk about it in the second hour in more detail. There's an authorization of importing genetics from France. From the outside, well, I know that the work must be, consensual, but it doesn't really make any sense. We have found somebody in France who is not vaccinating baby ducks, and therefore we can import them. People from the CFIA went to France early September to check out, and now it's almost Christmas, and Minister Holland told me that they're hoping for a report to be published by the end of the year. Do you find these delays reasonable? Our duck industry is currently being threatened, and it's really a shame because it's a high-quality product from Quebec, and it's being threatened.
Thank you very much. I understand your concern. Not surprised to hear it. You've voiced it a number of times, and of course, I am certainly not going to dictate that CFIA is not doing their job. The fact is, as you know, we wouldn't be exporting near $100 billion worth of agricultural products, and CFIA does their job. Robert, I'll let you handle this, but we expected this question.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. With regards to the analysis and the evaluation, it's being finalized right now. As I understand it, the report will be finalized early 2024 or 25, and then I think if we can go ahead with that whole process of importing the genetics. So we are very close to reviewing the current decision. Thank you for the answer. However, the delay for the industry is not reasonable. I think we have to look into how we're proceeding and try to go quickly. In the same industry, there is the avian flu that recently entered our territory. I don't want to seem like somebody who doesn't think that it's important, quite the opposite. However, in other countries, when a flock is threatened, it is isolated, and then we can still sell some animals. Here, we seem to be going too quickly before even getting any results, and to see if there's any threat of the animals being showing any illness, that we destroy it. So, for example, 3 flocks had been determined as sick, and we had just 2 of them had been, killed off before we even got the results for the 3rd one. I feel like we're going a little bit too fast. And if Canada is going faster than other countries, for example, Poland or France, where they're not doing this practice, we still import their flocks, but here we kill them. So if we choose to be strict and kill them scientifically, I think that's fine. But should we not then properly subsidize the farmers and compensate them because they're not properly compensated? All the cleaning and everything that takes place afterwards, that's $30,000 at least. Don't you think we can improve on that?
Thank you very much. And of course, on the avian flu, there's a lot of, in BC in particular, it's a big issue. And of course, cleanup is a big issue. And of course, with the difficulty you have with the ducks, CFIA has to be careful that they make sure they make the right decision on this. Robert, I don't know if you have any more to add on that, but.
Peut-être, Monsieur le Président, je peux ajouter.
Perhaps I'd like to add a few details. If Mr. Perron wants to get back to it on the second panel, we can get back to it.
That you're making reference to, I think, or suggesting that there was detection of low pathogenic avian influenza. I just want to be clear that low pathogenic influenza can very much and very quickly turn to other strains of high path AI. We actually detected this particular case in these 3 farms at the slaughter plant. So which actually shows that our surveillance is working in detecting this at slaughter. And you're correct that we did compensate the producer. I think the challenge is they were compensated at a rate of a regular duck. Whereas I think in this case, the producer was disappointed insofar as he wasn't getting market value for foie gras.
One last question to the Minister, but we will get back to it in the second hour. Mr. Minister, I'd like to talk to you about pork. We've been talking about the avian influenza. Now let's move on to the hog diseases. There are some zones of exclusion that have been designated. So, for example, we do that for the avian influenza. If we had some zones of exclusion with countries that we are exporting to before the disease comes up, then maybe we can control things better. And is there an emergency fund?
But I'm going to caution my colleagues, be careful on the patience of the chair when we get right down to you're still reaming out a question at 0. That's not how this is supposed to work. So go ahead, Mr. Minister. Brief response.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have zoning agreements with Italy and, of course, other countries around the world. We're working hard to create zones because, pray God, it doesn't happen in this country. A lot of work has been done in the country. Tabletop exercises, just how we would deal with the African swine fever should it ever hit here. When I was minister previously, it was a big issue, and I come back and it's still a big issue. But we've kept it out of the country to this point. And pray God we can. We're taking every measure possible. Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back to the committee, Minister. I want to talk to you with my first question on the persistent case of food price inflation. Now, I will acknowledge that the rate has gone down, but a lot of Canadians are still feeling the pinch. There has certainly been some work done in terms of giving more legislative authority to the Competition Bureau. I know there's an industry-led grocery code of conduct, but that aside, a lot of Canadians are still feeling the pinch because in the middle of our food supply system, and this I would argue is harming both our producers and consumers, we still have a severely concentrated marketplace in grocery retail. Now, in the last few months, I have attempted with my limited resources to introduce legislation to both address the problem of shrinkflation, to have some kind of transparency on how unit pricing is done, but also on trying to get more food cooperatives set up in Canada so that we can provide some honest competition to the big grocery giants. I understand that these areas do fall primarily under the purview of your colleague, the Minister of Industry. But my question to you, Minister, is given this persistent problem, why have you failed in advocating with your colleague in getting this problem addressed. It's not like it's new. Canadians have been suffering through this for several years now.
You're right, the problem is not new, and it's a big issue, but as you're also right that prices have adjusted somewhat, but not enough. You're also right that the Competition Bureau, under the Competition Act, which is not under my jurisdiction, but it has been changed in order to allow more competition in the country, and I think that's what you want to see happening too. And of course, if you're going to more co-ops and more competition in the sector, it's of course competition is the spice of business. It brings everybody to a reality, and I would be very strong on that.
Okay, but again, it's fallen to me as a member of the opposition to actually come up with legislative proposals. What I want to understand is why has the Government of Canada, with its considerable resources, not done the same? I understand that we are in a bit of a deadlock in the House. That doesn't stop your government from coming forward with at least some proposals on the matter.
Well, as you know, the Grocery Code of Conduct, which was quite an issue, and
Industry-led.
Absolutely industry-led, with some assistance from government. Sure. But that is more of a long-term, but it's also a long-term, but it's my understanding is it's not going to lower the price of groceries, but it's just going to make it more fair and more visible as to what takes place. Being a farmer, I well understand you hear from the gate to the plate. There's no problem at the gate. But before it gets to the plate, yes, there is a problem.
I think we've got to tackle the middleman, Mr.
Yeah.
Thank you. I need to change to the sustainable, the SCAP. As you know, that is in place from April 1st of last year, 2023, until March 31st of 2028. We have had numerous witnesses who are quite concerned that with that locked-in timeline, there's little room to change programs which may not be adequately serving the population they're designed for. This has come from no less than Keith Currie, president of the Canadian Farmers. So what I want to know, Minister, is, given that we are locked in and you have in these supplementary estimates, you've got $42 million listed here. But what are you doing, Minister, to respond to the needs of farmers, which have been clearly brought forward to this committee? What are you doing to alleviate their concerns and maybe show that you're willing to take some leadership on this in possibly finding ways to make sure that these programs are more responsive and not waiting until March 31st of 2028?
Of course we want to make them more responsive, I can assure you, and that's my job in order to do that. And any program that is more difficult to deal with, we would certainly take action on it. But I'll let the deputy explain the requirements for this, but we want to make sure that any program, no matter what, and in agriculture, sometimes it's the problem to get it in a form that people understand and are able to access it. And I want to make sure that any time like that I can do anything to make it more accessible, I will do it. For sure.
Maybe I will come back to your deputy in the next round, because I only have just over a minute left with you, and I want to make sure that I have questions with you. Minister, I'm sure you've met with the National Farmers Union before. They have long been calling for the establishment of a Canadian Farm Resilience Agency to better build capacity in your department for better climate adaptation. We know farmers are repeatedly telling us that they are on the front lines of climate change. The On-Farm Climate Fund did a lot of contracting out to, I think, approximately 12 third-party organizations rather than having that in-house capacity. How do you react to their proposal for this Canadian Farm Resilience Agency? Are you going to treat this matter with the seriousness that it deserves and try to actually build that in-house capacity rather than falling prey to what the federal government usually does, which is contracting that out and losing that important knowledge that we could have in-house with our great public servants?
Alistair, thank you very much. And what we want to do, sometimes we have to go outside of the department in order, if we don't have the proper clientele in place to deal with.
How are you going to build it?
But, well, I don't know if I'm going to hire more people to do this. It's
You're the minister, sir.
Yes, yes, but it's also, we want to make sure the funds go to where they should go. That is what we want to make sure they do.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to our second round. So I have Ms. Rood for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, we recently heard testimony that refunds to farmers from the fertilizer tariffs were withdrawn and that they've been ordered to pay those tariffs back with interest at that. Minister, was this your decision? And if not, whose decision was it? And do you have the authority to make decisions of this kind, or do you have to defer to the Minister of the Environment for Agricultural Policy?
Are you talking about the Russian fertilizer ban? As you know, that was
tariffs.
Yes, and you know why they were put in place.
Of course, but we also heard that from the fertilizer company last week at committee that refunds were given for the tariffs collected, and then 11 months later, the government came back and said, "You farmers actually owe us this money back, and you have to pay interest on it."
Check it.
Thank you, Chair. So this, I think, is a discussion of ongoing discussion between the firm and the Canada Border Services Agency, who has carriage of this issue.
Minister, was it your decision then to reverse the decision on the tariffs?
It would not be my decision. It's a border issue.
Thank you. In 2021, the Liberal government made all rail crossings the same safety standard, including rail crossings on farms, even where they're only used a couple of times a year. So was there a rise in rail accidents on these private crossings?
I don't have the details on that.
So then what prompted the Liberal government to make those changes to the regulated crossings on private lands?
Hold on there, Mr. Minister, and hold on, Ms. Rood. I've stopped the clock. Point of order, Mr. Drouin.
As the honourable member has heard from the previous testimony, this would have been a regulation change started in 2014 when she and her party were in government. It was only the implementation date that got delayed, but I want to provide facts. Facts are important in this discussion. And the Minister of Agriculture and AFC have nothing to do with that. That's a Transport Canada issue. And I think we'll be hearing from rail transport companies on Thursday.
Ms. Rood.
Again, would you have made a representation to the Minister of Transport, given you're the Agriculture Minister, to make those changes at the regulated crossings on private lands, despite?
If I was here, possibly I would. If it was involving agriculture, I would have input.
Are you aware how much it will cost an average farm to upgrade a crossing?
No, I'm not.
Well, I can give that to you. It's going to cost between $600,000 and $2 million per farmer. Do you know how much it would cost to maintain those crossings annually?
Well, it's something I would have to look into, and I haven't received a complaint on that, and perhaps I will after this committee hearing, but I would certainly not want to see farmers faced with something like that, and I try to deal with it I think farmers in all sectors understand that I work on their behalf, but this is something I'm not abreast of, actually, and I will deal with it, and you brought it to the forefront, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it from this day on.
Thank you, Minister. Just to let you know, the media reports say it's going to cost up to $200,000 annually for a farmer to maintain those crossings, and I know many farmers are wondering how they're going to pay for the upgrade and maintain the crossings. So I'm just curious why the Liberal government would allow these railroads to download these costs onto farmers.
Well, number one, I would have to have somebody bring it to my attention, and if they did, I will certainly work with the farmers to make sure they're not leveled, because I'm fully aware, as being a farmer, the one that pays the price in the end is always farmers. Sometimes governments help, but farmers end up paying without any question, and I don't want to see that.
Thank you. Now, farmers asked for an extension to the November 25th deadline or to find some common sense safety standard for these rail crossings. Did you encourage the Minister of Transportation to delay the implementation of these onerous changes?
Well, my discussion with the Minister of Transport would be a cabinet issue, and I would not be discussing that here.
Would you extend it, Minister?
I would have to know the details of it before I would.
Go ahead, Mr. Drouin.
Obviously, this is a transport issue. I respect the honourable member, but the Minister of Agriculture does not have the authority to extend that power. So obviously, he's made some advocation at Cabinet, but, and by the way, no farmers has paid a single cent yet. And Transport is working on this issue, and we're talking about 10 farmers right now, and they will work on this issue, and our government will get it done.
So what I will say, I will go to you, Mr. Barlow, in a second. There's certainly, as your chair, we want to have a certain amount of leeway. I think Mr. Joanne is right. This is a transport issue. The minister is well within his right to be able to take questions in relation to any conversations he may have with the Minister of Transport. To Mr. Joanne's point, I was in Ontario actually last week, and I do think this number has gotten down, I think, to 10 instances. But certainly, Ms. Rood, you're well within your rights to ask it. But I will go to Mr. Barlow, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, if the Liberal members want us to censor our questions that we have to the minister, by all means, maybe we'll share them before the meeting. But I think it's up to us to decide what questions we ask the minister, not to have them approved by the Liberal members before we ask those questions. The Liberal Minister of Agriculture represents farmers, as he just said. So I think these questions are what farmers are asking, and we are advocating on their behalf.
Okay, so we've established that. Ms. Rood, you have 70 seconds left. I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Sir, we've heard testimony from farm families on how the capital gains tax is effectively shutting down next generation farmers, and you've publicly stated that you were not consulted beforehand. And I'm just curious, why not? And was accelerating the decline of family-owned farms and the risk posed for Canadian farmland ownership considered when making these tax changes?
I appreciate your question, and I have had many conversations in Cabinet on many issues, and I know what you're referring to is that I indicated that I do not write the budget. I still say I do not write the budget, but I do know what goes on with agriculture. But I am not the Minister of Transport or any other, or a minister, other ministers. It's difficult to answer questions that relate to other ministers. But on
Minister,
the
I could ask
gains,
another question on that then, that would
on the
relate
capital
directly to
gains
you.
tax exemption, on the capital gains tax, as you know, we increased the capital gains tax exemption to
Will this tax increase-
$1,250,000. You're fully aware of that.
How will this tax increase impact the economic viability of the family farm and the ability of next generations of farmers to carry out the tradition of farming?
So we're at time, Ms. Rood. Go ahead, Mr. If you would like to finish.
Oh, I appreciate your question, and of course, from any medium and small size operations with the tax change, it'll mean they pay less capital gains tax, and I think my honourable colleague is well aware of that.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the honourable colleague from Malpeque, joining us virtually. Over to you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. It's an interesting conversation so far, Minister, and I'll go back to the original questions in relevance to the crickets. And there's a lot of crickets in that room, Minister. You know, the PM visited the new incoming president in Washington. We never heard a word from the opposition praising that move. We have a new office in Manila that you opened up in Indo-Pacific. We haven't heard a word about that. You went to China, and they're condemning you for going to China, which I think is a strange move. We have a new school food program that we're going to support local suppliers and farmers. We have a sustainable Canadian agriculture partnership. We talked about the interest in young farmers. And if we don't continue to build on that program, which is in the supplementary estimates, and I think, Minister, I want to ask you a very specific question. Why do you think the Conservatives will vote against supplementary estimates when we have agreements with provinces and territories, when we're investing millions of dollars to help farmers and producers? And they're saying that they're representing farmers. I just heard that over and over again. But here's a program that is very significant in Atlantic Canada and very significant in Prince Edward Island that's been successful. And I'm still wondering and scratch my head why the Conservatives would vote against it.
Well, thank you for the question, but it's awful hard to answer questions for other people or other departments. But you mentioned the school food program and the infrastructure program. The school food program, we had a great announcement on Prince Edward Island with joining with the Premier of Prince Edward Island, and what. Now I understand there's just under 200,000 children receiving a meal every day in schools right across this country, and that figure will continue to expand and expand. It's so important that we have these programs in place because my wife being a teacher, she fully understands what happens when children, and truly, kids go to school hungry. it's a tough situation, and to be able to be part of a government that's trying to deal with that kind of an issue and put some food into the bellies of children, I'm certainly proud of that, and any other program. And of course, with that, you're helping farmers too. Everything we can do to have more food consumed, it helps farmers. And there's many other programs we have. But Heath, I can't answer the question as to why the Conservative Party of Canada would vote against it. They probably can answer that question.
And Minister, I wanted to ask you, just turning a little bit to the beef industry, and obviously it's been an industry that you've worked very closely with and have a good relationship with, as many other Liberals in your caucus do as well. But I wanted to know that, how are we supporting the Canadian beef industry around the world to ensure that those exports are maintained and maybe expanded into different countries?
Thank you, Heath. Of course, the office in the Pacific Rim area to make sure that we're there in that area, just like I heard in China, I heard in the Pacific area, is that if you're going to sell products in these areas, you have to be there. You have to be present. That's why that office is open. It opens the market for beef. It also opens the market for potatoes. And in fact, I believe the Potato Marketing Board in Prince Edward Island is going to send 4 containers over there. It just opens more markets. It will open markets for grains, oilseeds. That's all so important. That's what we have to do. We have to expand our trade and be diversified as much as we possibly can. I know we depend on the States, and a large portion of our markets are there. But anywhere else we can sell products, we want to do that. And as I said before, if you're going to sell a product somewhere, you have to be there. Government and people involved in the industry to be able to answer questions to the importers. They're really the ones that buy the product, the importers. Thank you very much, Heath.
Chair, how much time do I have?
You're 20 seconds, so if you want to get on my Christmas card list this year,
Look, I just, Chair, you know what, and back to the minister, if the funding is not approved due to delay tactics by the opposition, some of the local projects may not be achievable. So I hope that they see the light and put partisan politics aside and vote to continue to support our farmers. Thanks, Chair.
Well, we're getting close
Fully
to
agree with
Christmas,
you, Heath.
so we'll hope that we can all find good nonpartisan spirit heading into Christmas. Very briefly,
yeah,
Mr.
very
Barrow.
brief. I know that the Liberal colleagues have been upset with some of the questions we've been asking, but I just have to ask why a Liberal member from Malpeque, PEI, did not ask a single question about the potato issue in C potato, which is a crisis in PEI.
We're getting a little bit, and I've become a little bit liberal here, but we're having some fun back and forth. Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes, 30 secondes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, thank you for answering the questions. I'd like to come back to pork. If I understood correctly, you said you're negotiating with countries where we sell pork to determine exclusion zones in case that there of an infection of African swine fever. That's been done. We've met hog producers that want emergency funds just in case. I'm sure they've met with you and people from your department. Are you working on such an emergency fund?
Well, I'm always working on emergency funds, Mr. Perron. And we have programs in place to deal with emergency situations, as you're fully aware. The BRM programs are set up for that, and you and I discussed the issue in your province, and it came to fruition. But I didn't hear from you, but we got that done.
Non, ben justement, Monsieur le ministre, vous m'amenez sur un bon sujet.
Well, that's great. You're allowing me to segue into agri-recovery, which we've talked about for Quebec. You just referred to it. If I've understood correctly, the funds should be available sometime in 2025 of $22.2 million that have been allocated. 2025 for damages which occurred in 2023, honestly, it makes absolutely no sense. Are you going to revive the companies that did not survive those events in 2023? You have to review this program. Now, I met someone from the agri-food department this week They said that they met somebody from your department and said that they will meet up with you. Will you start reviewing the farming agricultural funding programs? You have 30 seconds.
Yes, and it was discussed in Whitehorse at our last Fed Provincial Territorial Conference, and it's not an easy issue to deal with because you're dealing with provinces and territories and the federal government, but we want to make it certainly true that the programs need to be adjusted to fit the times, and we're working hard to do that. But you have to work with the provinces in order to do that. But your point is well taken. The programs need to be adjusted, and we're working hard on that. And I thank you for that question.
Thank you to you both. Mr. McGregor, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, my colleague Richard Cannings, who I share this committee with, he had a good meeting with the Dean's Council for Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine. And I understand from that meeting that they submitted a funding proposal for vaccine development to address the spread of zoonotic diseases like H5N1, but that funding request was denied. And I know that when it comes to this specific area, there's a lot of collaboration between you and Minister Holland because of the nature of how the CFIA works. But, given the fact that, in British Columbia, we had a teenager become infected, this still poses a very grave risk to our entire poultry industry. Do you not think that, as the minister responsible for agriculture, do you not think that decision to deny that funding to the Dean's Council, who does incredible work, do you not think that was short-sighted?
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor, and of course I appreciate your question, and you fully understand that I will not evaluate whether a vaccine is appropriate or not. But I understand that your question is that
it was funding to develop the
vaccine. We have spent a lot of money as a government to develop vaccines in many different areas, but I'll let Robert, and you can deal with it.
So I'm not Mr. Chair, through you, familiar with the request that is being referred to and what involvement CFI would have had in that decision? As was pointed out, there's no doubt that this would have been closely tied with Health Canada, but I would be happy to take that request away. I would say that we do invest for sure in both ASF and HPI vaccination investments with other governments worldwide. I would have to take away this particular issue that's been raised. I'm not familiar with it and what would have led to the denial of funding.
We'll get the information for you.
Okay, I would appreciate that if you could submit that to the committee. And then just finally, just on I only have a few seconds, so just on the subject of temporary foreign workers, and there have been some problems identified with the program, but how are you advocating with your colleagues around the cabinet table to make sure that pathway to permanent residency, if they're good enough to work here temporarily, which many do for years on end, how are you continuing to advocate for that pathway to be strengthened towards permanent residency?
I'm glad you brought up temporary foreign workers. It's a big issue, and as you know, it's held at 20% for agriculture, and that is vitally important. Of course, there is, as you know, an issue with immigration and housing, which we had to address, and that's an issue that had to be addressed. But temporary foreign workers is vitally important to the agricultural sector, and I can assure you it was a hot issue, and I'm very pleased that we were able to keep it at 20% because it's used in your province and right across the country. And in fact, the apples would not be picked if you did not have foreign workers, and I'm fully aware of that.
Okay, we're going to go to our final 5 minutes for the Conservatives, 5 minutes for the Liberal colleagues, and then we'll excuse the Minister because that'll be an hour, and then we'll have a little bit of time for officials. So, Mr. Steinley, over to you for 5 minutes.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for coming to Regina. It's been since 2019 where we've seen a Liberal in Saskatchewan, so they're kind of like unicorns. We hear about them, but we don't see them very often. So I appreciate you coming out. Last time we chatted, we did talk about the capital gains tax. I'd like to revisit that conversation where you said you weren't aware that it was going to be in the budget, which is a bit of a surprise, but you've had your answer to that. My question is, since it was delivered in the budget now, how many stakeholder consultations have you had about the capital gains? And could you table those stakeholders that you met with specifically on the capital gains increase?
Thank you very much. And I think my honourable colleague is well aware of what I said last time, and you can interpret it whatever way you like. I said I do not rate the budget, and I do not rate the budget. I also can assure you that I'm fully involved in whatever involves the agricultural sectors, I am fully involved and will continue to be as long as I'm minister. And you're fully aware, too, that we increased the capital gains tax exemption to $1,250,000, and also...
I agree with all that, Mr. Minister. I'm just wondering, have you a list of stakeholders from the ag sector that you have consulted on about the capital gains increase since it was delivered in the budget?
Thank you very much. I continue to consult with agricultural sector continually. Every day, I think I talk with different sectors of agriculture, and very pleased to do it.
Have they talked about the financial burden they feel this is going to be on the next generation? You know, we had the Dohertys here at committee, and the son broke down in tears in committee because of the financial pressures he's feeling, that because of the capital gains increases, he believes he won't be able to carry on the family potato farm because of this government's policy direction.
Everybody is entitled to their interpretation. As you're fully aware, I think you're aware, that this change will help small and medium-sized agricultural farmers from across the country. There are large firms that will pay a bit more, and that's simply how it is. This was put in place. You have to adjust the tax system, and in fact, we have many programs in place, like the Farmer Care Program, the Child Tax Credit, all these dental program, continual programs.
Yeah, thank you. I know those programs. You guys made a commitment, the Liberals made a commitment that is only going to affect 0.13% of the population. I haven't heard from a farmer who's been talking about succession planning with their kids that this has not affected. In fact, in 2004, the total farm debt was $48.9 billion across Canada, and now in 2023, the total farm debt is $140 billion. How do you think the increase in capital gains is going to increase the debt load on that next generation of farmers? And how do you believe they're going to make a go of it, Mr. Minister?
Well, the increase in the capital gains exemption is going to help farmers. It's going to help farmers, and I think you know that. It went from $1 million to $1,250,000, and then there's Canadian Entrepreneur Incentive, and there's a number of programs in place.
Farmers don't qualify for that program.
That will help farmers and make sure that they're able to continue on.
I do have a quote from the Grain Farmers of Canada that said this capital gains tax increases will be about a 30% increase on farmers across the board. That was what their numbers were. Do you think that Canada grain growers got that wrong, or do you agree with that number?
What I can tell you is what this capital gains tax change will do will help medium and small enterprises right across this country be able to transfer their properties. Without that, they would have more difficulty. This will help small and medium-sized farmers right across this country.
I'm not sure how that's possible, Mr. Minister. I'm reading from a release.
I'm reading from a
release from the federal government should reverse their harmful capital tax gains for agriculture sector, and it is signed on from the federal and provincial territorial ministers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Manitoba. And all of these ministers have said this is going to damage the agriculture sector in our country. Are those ministers right, or is your government policy not going to help farmers across our country?
Well, all I can do is tell you, my friend, what they will do, what this will do. What this will do will help small and medium-sized operations be able to transfer their property. I think my honourable colleague is aware of that, and you know that that's right.
We're at time, Mr. Steinley. Sorry, Mr. Minister.
Too.
That is 5 minutes. A couple of things I want to say to Mr. Steinley. I've spent a good time in your province, beautiful time in Saskatchewan. So the minister's a good Liberal, and maybe Drouin as well. And I'll say certainly when we talk about the proposed capital gains, I do want the committee to recognize that the government has extended that to agriculture from 1.25 to 3.25. The measures are not passed, to be fair, but that is the intention of the government. Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here, Minister. I wanted to highlight the positive impact of the local food infrastructure fund. I appreciate your time here. I also appreciate the time that you came to visit Kitchener-Conestoga to see firsthand the positive impact of that funding. The goal of that program is to improve accessibility to nutritious and local food, and it helps purchase and install essential infrastructure and equipment. In Kitchener-Conestoga, the local food infrastructure fund has been a game changer. The Wilmot Family Resource Center, which you and I visited, received $23,000 from the fund to help acquire a refrigerated van, which it's a vital tool that delivers fresh food, locally grown produce to families in need in my community. But I also just wanted to highlight that local farmers have been incredibly generous, and I'm sure not just in my riding but across the country, when they have a bit extra. They donate. They donate the chicken, pork, squash, corn, honey, eggs, all of these things, just because they're part of our community, and I wanted to thank them publicly too. Organizations in Kitchener-Conestoga like the Wilmot Family Resource Center, Woolwich Community Services, they're tirelessly providing those essential services and support. And that local approach is what I appreciate so much about the local food infrastructure fund, because people are receiving services from their neighbors. They're part of the community already. They're familiar faces and friends. So in your travels across Canada as Minister of Agriculture, specifically in those smaller communities, can you share how you've seen that local food infrastructure fund help Canadians?
Tim, at the Wilmot Valley Centre, that was a touching event to see what took place there and so many people that cared. And that's you receive some funding, and it's certainly on full display what value that funding is. And as you know, we put $63 million into the last budget, and we need to make sure that we quit playing games in the House and get this estimates through and make sure that this money becomes available, because without a doubt what you're doing helps so much the people that have less in your area, and that's just right across the country. I see it right in my own district too, right in my own home community fridge. The infrastructure program is so vitally important to help people, and I also you have that refrigerated truck, which means that they're able to deliver food around. It's just so heartwarming to see. But I think the most heartwarming part of that trip was at your was to see the people who worked so hard and cared so much about the people that had less. That means so much. And without a doubt, that's going on right across the country. And I've seen it in many places, but a great display in your area.
Well, you mentioned it, and I'm concerned, and Canadians are concerned about, if the Conservatives are blocking supplementary estimates, what's at stake for programs like that that are feeding families?
Well, we have to quit blocking the House and get the estimates through. And that's what's required. That has to be passed through the House and make sure these funds are available to the people that need them right across the country. You see the value of it. You see the results of what can take place when programs like this are put in place. And I was certainly pleased to be there to see it. And, of course, it's just a demonstration of what takes place right across the country and the need there is. Now, that's so important, Tim.
Well, thank you for that. Recent election in the United States, with Donald Trump's recently election as President of the United States, farmers here, producers across the country are wondering how this new U.S. administration could impact our agriculture sector. So you have experience working with the previous Trump administration. Can you share with us how you can help prepare our government for the challenges that might be ahead?
Yes, I was there during the last Trump administration, and we got along very well, to say the least, with the Secretary of Agriculture. In fact, the Secretary ended up on my farm. I can tell you, when I invite people to my home, to my farm, my wife says, quit inviting people or they're going to come. When the Secretary of Agriculture says he's coming, that's quite a fuss. And it was a great fuss, because he came to the farm, and In fact, we had a great rapport, and Secretary-elect Rollins, I hope to be able to deal with her, and I'm sure I understand she was brought up on a farm and understands the agricultural sector. Without a question, for the beef industry right across the country, we understand that the cattle sometimes go back and forth across the border 4 or 5 times before they're butchered. They might be born in Saskatchewan and raised down west or in Florida and grazed on the prairie and then back and forth 3 or 4 times. So these are the kind of issues that are so intertwined. But everything is so intertwined with us in the U.S., and they're such a valuable customer. We understand that, and I think the Prime Minister's trip last week was so important, because you have to be there, and you have to make sure you keep those great relations up, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of our first hour of today's meeting. Minister, thank you for being here before the committee. Thank you. I think I speak on behalf of all my colleagues. Thank you for your work on behalf of Canadian agriculture. And we'll let you get on with your day. Our officials will stick around. So, colleagues, I'm going to suspend just for a minute or two, and then we'll be up with the officials. So, meeting suspended. Let me just look at my notes. I've got Marie-Claude Guillard, and I just want to make sure I have your title right. as you've joined us, although I don't know if I have you in my notes. But I know you're with, I believe, CFIA or the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So welcome. Thank you to have you here. And we have Mr. Yu. Are you with CFIA? Okay, wonderful. Just for the benefit of our colleagues in the room. We'll go right into questions. Mr. Epp, you have 6 minutes.
And thank you to the officials for being here. In the opening round, the minister stated that he had not or was not aware of the railway and the private crossings issue, which I find a bit astounding that he would not have been briefed on that. I want to actually go into also the railway issues, but with drainage. Specifically, what federal change in policy or in legislation actually has led to CN Rail declaring that they no longer are subject to the Ontario Drainage Act?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I will note just on the rail crossings in the first instance, and I do say I should defer to Transport Canada colleagues on this. I do think a lot of work has been going on to identify potential exemptions, either temporary or longer term. I'll leave that with them. I will say I've met with multiple stakeholders since I started this job, and this issue has not been raised personally with me. On the drainage issue, I'm very sorry. I think probably in terms of regulating and working with CN, that would probably be a better question answered by Transport Canada officials.
Now, CN is actually being sued by Perth East, a municipality in Ontario. CPKC is being sued by my own municipality, Chatham-Kent. I know the Ontario Federation has written extensively publicly on behalf of farmers, so I'm a little surprised that AAFC, I know the Ontario Minister of Agriculture has written to the Minister of Transport. So what has AAFC done, made representations to Transport on this issue, both the crossings, I guess, and on drainage in particular?
Thank you, Chair. So to my knowledge, on this drainage issue, no representations have been made to me on this issue from any of our stakeholders. I will ask Tom if any have with you. You may have.
I would, not. Although I meet regularly with provincial and national stakeholders, probably dozens a year, if not hundreds. They have not raised it with me, nor has it been raised directly with the minister in any of the meetings of his, which I have attended.
Background. Both CN and CP have declared they are no longer subject to provincial legislation on drainage, yet they have complied with that for over 100 years. The Ontario Drainage Act was the single first piece of business undertaken by the Ontario legislature when it was formed, because it's so important to Ontario farmers. And yet, for 100 years, the federally regulated railways complied with it. 5 years ago, they stopped, and now municipalities are suing them. In fact, there was no regulatory change or policy change. They have found a loophole in the legislation when the Railways Act was morphed into the Canada Transport Act and to the Railway Safeties Act. So I'm going to ask you, the AAFC has done no work on drainage in Ontario and other places with respect to federal legislation?
Thank you, Chair. I will never say we have never done any work on a specific issue, in case we have, but I will say and just reiterate the point from my colleague that we have never had brought this issue been brought forward to us by any of our stakeholders, and so to my knowledge it's not something we're actively engaged on.
Thank you. I'll switch gears a bit to fertilizer, and I'm going to actually not focus on potassium or nitrogen, but rather on phosphorus, which Canada lacks in present capacity. Eastern Canada, where I'm from, is largely dependent on, in the past, imports from Belarus and Morocco. Florida is the main source of phosphorus into Canada. What work has the department done with respect to the threat of 25% tariffs, and how will that affect our Canadian ag industry?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So in the immediate aftermath of the announcement from the President-elect, needless to say, we're talking to all our stakeholders about this. They're bringing up the issues of the tariffs. I will just kind of defer to the comments that have been made by the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister about the desire to work closely with the American incoming administration, given the mutual dependencies of the agriculture sector across the border.
Has AAFC done any work at all for enhancing Canada's our own supply of phosphorus?
I'll turn to Tom, not to my knowledge.
Mr. Chair, I'd just say that we certainly have engaged with ag stakeholders, fertilizer stakeholders, on security of supply and availability of different types of fertilizers over the past several years, including looking at what options might exist to increase domestic supply for those where we're reliant on imports.
Can you table any information on that, specifically with possibly enhanced mining of phosphorus in Canada with the committee?
Any information that we have on this, we'll be happy to table.
Great, thank you. Switching gears again a bit to the Grocer Code of Conduct with which the minister raised. What makes Canada different? It's an issue that I've certainly followed. I'm sure the department has followed the evolution of the development of the Grocer Code of Conduct in the UK and in Australia. What makes Canada different than those two countries that will allow us not to have to follow that same process that unveiled or unfurled in both of those countries in lockstep?
Thanks for the question. I would say that to say what in what way we're different, I think what I will just say is that this is an issue that we have worked on with provincial and territorial governments. It was discussed at the Whitehorse meeting that the minister referred to earlier today, and there was a consensus among federal and provincial governments that an industry-led voluntary approach was the most effective means at this time, notwithstanding what others might have done.
Great, thank you for that. Are you aware of the other steps that have evolved in the other countries?
I believe the other models are a little bit more dirigiste, if I may say. But again, I think the idea was to tailor the situation to the Canadian situation, and again, there was a consensus at a federal, provincial, territorial table that this was the way to proceed.
Mr.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Epp. Mr. Drouin, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being in front of us. My honourable colleague asked about the Ontario Drainage Act, and the title speaks for itself. Has the Ontario government sent us a letter to request our help to enforce their own act?
To my knowledge, no. And if there were such a letter, I imagine it would have gone to another. It would have gone to transport as opposed to our department.
Right. So the issue is the Ontario Drainage Act was passed in Ontario and not at the federal level. For decades now, CN and CP has not been a Crown Corp of the Government of Canada. I understand that there are federal regulations that they must follow, but at the same time, we expect our rail lines to follow provincial regulations wherever they may cross. And I think that this is an issue where I hear where the stakeholders are at, but at the same time, if provinces want to enforce their own act, then they have the power to do so, and I hope that they do it. And I fully support our farmers and our municipalities who are facing those particular issues. Mr. Chair, we've over the last few days, I've noticed on Twitter there's a campaign of disinformation on a food additive, and I would like to ask my questions to CFI in terms of how we approve food additives in Canada, because it's been raised in terms of those who are advocating to provide public trust into our system. At the same time, certain professors are at the same time providing mistrust in the system in terms of not providing real data. And I'm just asking to CFI, when a company, a private sector company, asks for CFIA in order for a food additive to be available in Canada, what is this particular process in order to, is CFIA going to treat this as a food additive or perhaps a drug? And what's the balance there in terms of ensuring not only public safety, but also animal safety and health, human health at the end of the day?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I just maybe want to clarify that if we're regarding food additives for actually human food consumption, that would be Health Canada. If it's related to feed additive for animal feed, there is a process that is administered by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. I think in particular, Mr. Chair, the ingredient that is being referred to is 3-NOP, which is a feed ingredient that has been recently approved in Canada. It actually is also approved in the U.S. for use in beef cattle. It is approved in the EU for use in beef cattle as well. It was recently approved in Canada for use in dairy cattle and in beef cattle, and it is approved because it is a known reducer of methane emissions for cattle, which of course is a key contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. There is a robust process in place. They go through an evaluation at the CFIA. There is a consultation process, and in particular for 3-NOP. That ingredient was consulted from November to December, after which it was added into the ingredient table, which then allows manufacturers to make a determination on whether or not they want to use that additive in their feed. So we regulate the ingredient.
Just so I understand correctly, that consultation period, it was public? So anybody, Joe and Jane Porch, my farmer from Dalkeith or St. Albert could have commented, or anybody from anywhere in Canada could have commented on that particular ingredient. And I don't want to pick on 3-NOP, just in general on feed, and I'm sorry, not food, but feed additive, yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, the answer to the question is anytime we look at adding a feed ingredient to our ingredient table, there is a consultation. It typically is 30 days, and if it is particularly nitrooxypropanol, 3-NOP that we're referring to, that consultation was open from November 16th to December 16th, and then it was put on the ingredient list at the end of January of 2024.
Okay, so let's say CFI missed something. You've clearly outlined that Europe had approved it prior, US has approved it, so obviously I'm assuming that CFI on a continuous basis, if there is new scientific data that is presented, obviously, CFI would consult with their partners, like-minded partners, as they always do. Is that the?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously always looking at emerging science, new science. If there is any evidence to suggest that something has become unsafe based on the intended uses, absolutely, that is correct, Mr. Chair.
Great, Mr. Chair. In the spirit of Christmas, I will cede my time.
Wow, I'll take that at the end. Go ahead, Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes, allez-y.
Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to get back to the ducks, Mr. Ianniero. I didn't want to waste the time I had with the minister earlier. Can you explain to people in the industry how it works? We stopped importing genetics from France because of avian flu, and they were vaccinating over there, and we didn't want vaccination here. Then we found out that they weren't vaccinating here, and it's been about a year since we found out that, according to what I've been told. One of the CFIA teams visited France in September. Now it's almost Christmas, and they're telling us the report will be available in 2025. Don't you think that's a little too long? The industry is waiting, and they're under threat because they can't produce anything in the meantime.
Merci, Monsieur Président, pour la...
Thank you for the question. I just want to make sure that my answer is precise, and I will share it in English.
First and foremost, I would say that we acknowledge the issue and the challenge that duck producers in Quebec that you're clearly outlining are facing. In response to a decision for France to vaccinate their commercial duck population, we did make a decision at that time to impose restrictions on the import of all poultry from France, including ducks. Our current belief is there are some risks in introducing HPIA into Canada. That being said, as was mentioned, we are in the process of conducting an evaluation. As was mentioned, we are doing that with the USDA, and there was a visit to France, and the risk assessment that I mentioned earlier is in the final stages, I understand, of being completed. It is at that point in time that I think we'll revisit the current bans that are in place, in particular on the duck genetics, and if there is reason to revisit that and to allow a more flexible approach for the importation of duck genetics or even other ducks and duck byproducts, I can assure through you, Mr. Chair, that we will endeavor in doing so based on the issues that clearly have been raised here.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for your answer. I still don't really understand why it's taking so long. Is it because we don't have enough resources? Mr. Ianniero, do you have enough resources to take on this work?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Je dirais pas que c'est une question.
I wouldn't say that it's a lack of resources. I understood that the visit happened in the last months, and as I said, the evaluation is being finalized.
It clearly is a pressing issue, and I can personally commit to ensuring that the evaluation is completed in short order, and perhaps more so that we look at the findings and render a decision on what flexibilities could be introduced as soon as possible.
Merci beaucoup. Sur le porc, c'est peut-être vous, monsieur.
On pork, Mr. Yaniro, maybe you would also be able to give me more information. I was pleased that the minister said that he's working on an emergency fund in case African swine flu enters Canada. If I understood correctly, there's also some communication with countries where we export pork so that there are zones of exclusion because we want to avoid what happened with duck and avian flu. There were flocks that had been killed off maybe preemptively, and it's a lot of loss for the companies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So there's no doubt that the CFI is taking the threat of the introduction of ASF into Canada very seriously. It obviously would have devastating impacts on the industry. We obviously are focusing on prevention, biosecurity, and in particular on the preparedness activities. And part of those preparedness activities is to promote business continuity. And one of the elements of that business continuity is ensuring that we have zoning, international zoning arrangements in place. We currently have zoning arrangements for the U.S., the European Union, Singapore, Vietnam, and Hong Kong. That makes up about 39% of the pork exports in dollar value from 2023. And we are in the process of continuing our negotiations with the United Kingdom, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, Chile, and Mexico. And when those are completed, that would actually have coverage through these arrangements of just under 79% of our annual dollar value of pork exports from 2023. As it relates to how we would deal with any surplus hogs in that event, I would have to turn to my colleagues at AAFC.
Merci pour la réponse. Pour ce qui est de l'accès au...
Accessing veterinary products now, it was mentioned earlier, maybe one of you can answer the following question. Of course, there aren't enough veterinarians right now, and a lot of them are coming from abroad. They have to get certification through an exam, some in Quebec, and some are getting certification in Winnipeg. Now, I'm being told that there's a question of numbers, so this not having enough vets is a big issue for farming. 15 seconds.
Peut-être, Monsieur le Président, peut-être mes collègues de l'agence sont mieux placés que moi, mais juste pour dire que oui, on est au courant de la situation, des idées de augmenter la capacité de...
We, of course, have to retrain vets who were trained abroad to make sure that they can practice in Canada. We are in contact with, we can get in touch with universities in order to make sure the training happens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess, Mr. Hansen, I'll turn to you. I know you were about to answer, but my time was short with the minister, and this is, I want to return to the line of questioning I had with the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Now, I know in these supplementary estimates, you have asked the Parliament of Canada to approve $42 million in the supplementary estimates for contributions to the cost-share programs. Back on October the 29th, Keith Curry, as president of the CFA, appeared before this committee, and I just want to quote some of his testimony for you. He said, quote, "We cannot wait until 2028 when the next 5-year FPT framework will be implemented to address the sector's disaster relief needs. That's why we are recommending that the Government of Canada, in partnership with the provinces, territories, and industry, immediately convene a disaster relief summit and strike a task team to look at options to better respond to environment-related disaster events." So this is not the only time that the CFA and others have made this call. I think there is quite a lot of concern about waiting all the way until March 31st, 2028. Can you inform this committee what steps the federal department is taking in terms of leadership of the provinces in maybe addressing these very real concerns.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I wonder if I might, begging the Chair's pardon, if I could make good on a promise I made in the round with the Minister and respond to an earlier question without taking away from the current member's time.
Certainly, you're entitled. Mr. McGregor can ask the question. So, in terms of providing the documentation, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm sorry. It was a question. It was a question from Mr. Barlow in the first round, and I promised the information, and I just want to make good on that on that promise.
Okay. Well, certainly.
But I just don't want to detract from Mr. McGregor's time.
Okay. Is that a commitment to provide documentation?
No, so I will just, maybe I'll do this in order. So just in regard, I believe the member had asked about the funding for Aspire Foods and whether or not it was inconsistent with programs and terms and conditions. And I just wanted to flag that the member is quite right that if you go to the website, it would say normally a maximum of $5 million. I will just clarify that the program terms and conditions do allow for a contribution of up to $10 million, and so it was consistent with the program T's and C's. So I just wanted to clarify that. And in response to your question or to the member's question, thank you, Chair. I think, and I have had the pleasure of meeting with Mr. Curry multiple times since I started this job, I will say that it's important to understand that the SCAP, although it's a 5-year agreement, it doesn't mean the entire system of supports for producers are kind of frozen in amber for that 5-year period. There are constant discussions on how we can strengthen elements of the program. To give just one example, there was a discussion at the Fed-Prov Ministers meeting this summer about potential adjustments to the agri-stability program to deal with very specific issues in the cow-calf sector. We are continuing to talk about how we can make the agri-recovery framework operate more efficiently, to the Minister's point. So we're certainly not in a situation where the program suite and the statutory programming under BRM can't be adjusted for 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. I'd like to turn also, I know that you, as officials, have been asked about the Grocery Code of Conduct, and we know that this was primarily industry-led, but that there was contributions from the Government of Canada. I guess what I want to know is, it is a voluntary code at this point, but I do believe that there are ways that the government could make it mandatory if it's not effective. So I'd like you to explain to this committee what particular benchmarks would have to be met in order for the government to intervene. Like, what are the markers? Like, how bad does it have to get if this code fails before the calls for mandatory would prompt you to take action?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I will speculate on this kind of set of factors that would lead to a change of approach on the code of conduct. And again, to reiterate the earlier point, because this is a shared undertaking with provincial and territorial governments, were there ever to be a change, a kind of a pivot on that in some sort of different direction, again, it would be something that we would want to talk about it in an intergovernmental context, and I don't think it would be right for me as an official in one single order of government to sort of speculate on what form that would take and why it would happen.
Okay, fair enough. And my next question, I'd like to also ask about the funding for the Local Food Infrastructure Fund that you have in these supplementary estimates. Like Mr. Lewis, I also have constituents who benefited from this funding. And I do believe that at its heart, it's very good for establishing much needed resiliency in local small communities like in my riding. But I guess what I want to know from the department is, how are you measuring the outcomes of this program in terms of recipients that have received money? How are you measuring how that local resilience and infrastructure has been built up over time? What are the markers you're looking for to measure the success of the program?
Thanks for the question, and Marie-Claude should add anything to my answer that she might wish, but I think the sort of the threshold answer to that would be kind of similar as we would do in any kind of new program, which is after a suitable period of time, a program evaluation to determine the impacts. But
Sir, what would a suitable amount of time be for this? Just curious.
You know, and Marie-Claude, I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if we have a standard time before we launch a program evaluation, but if there is, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I would say this funding, it's over the next 3 years, and usually an evaluation, it's after each 3 years of the program. So that's where we will see the evaluation and the look to the outcome for the program.
Yeah, we're a little over time, but I wanted to be gracious. No, I know I'm very flexible, very liberal. Mr. Barlow, you have a very quick intervention on a question around documents or a question around tabling additional information. Yeah. I will be fair to any other colleagues if you have anything very quick. Otherwise, I have a few questions and we're going to get out of here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the indulgence. Just to Mr. Hansen, you'd mentioned that there is some leeway with that program up to $10 million. Could you table with the committee what was the decision that allowed the Aspire food program to go from the 5 to 8.5? What was the specific trigger that allowed that to go to 8.5? And lastly, you're requesting $14.46 million for operating expenditures. Can you table with the committee how much of that will be spent on outside consultants, and how much has been spent on outside consultants each year going back 10 years, broken down by services at AAFC? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So I will say we were happy to provide information on the incrementality on the Aspire. I don't know if it would be characterized as a trigger or what, but the information we have, happy to provide. On consultants and professional expenditure, I will defer to Marie-Claude, but I'm sure we can table information on that. I will just add that. And especially in recent years, as a result of responsible government spending, all departments were required to lower their expenditures on these, and we are doing just that. But for the historical record, I'm sure we can provide any information that we have.
Okay, we'll leave that for the officials to table back. Colleagues, I'm just going to take a quick round of questions. Just first to CFIA. I have a document here that was prepared by, I think, 13 or 14 different organizations. It's called Improving Access to Veterinary Pharmaceuticals, Veterinary Health Products, Livestock Feeds, and Veterinary Biologics in Canada. Mr. Drouin took you, Mr. Inero, down a line of questioning about the good work that CFIA does, and I understand the important role that you play. I have been an advocate to say, how can we try to align information sharing amongst agencies, which I know some of that work is done, to allow for the expedition of some of these approvals that are so crucial for the agriculture industry. So can you just speak to, I believe there's a meeting upcoming around this. Can you speak to the work that we're doing around microbial resistance and making sure that we can try to have a breadth of approvals that really matter, because veterinary approvals from CFIA are down by 40%. That's concerning, I think, for the agriculture sector. How do we find that balance and give you the tools necessary?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think you're making reference to a recent white paper that was submitted by a series of stakeholders. Don't have all the details in front of me, but what I would quickly share is definitely working with our partners, both at the Public Health Agency of Canada as well as Health Canada, and obviously the CFIA, because we're all kind of involved in varying degrees to these approvals. I think we're also, I know at the CFIA, proactively trying to have meetings with a variety of both industry members as well as, in particular, the Animal Nutrition Association of Canada, on how we can better prioritize, one, getting submissions into Canada, because there are market factors where in some cases submissions just are not made into Canada for whatever reasons that are business decisions. So I think there was a recent meeting. I was not present at that meeting. I know that there'll be continued discussions to see whatever we can do. The other piece I would just add is we are always looking at ways of streamlining our approvals and seeing how we can leverage, and we already have certain authorities to leverage foreign decisions obviously of like-minded countries. So I think it's still a work in progress, but would want to share with you, Mr. Chair, our commitment to continue finding ways of streamlining that and getting more products into Canada and approved into Canada as expeditiously as possible.
No, I think that's extremely important. I don't want to speak for every member on this committee, but as the chair, this is something I hear consistently from commodity groups. I know you have a difficult job in CFIA at balancing public safety, but we also need these tools for food security and for the success of our men and women who are out producing food. So good to know, and I think what this committee could benefit from is, are there regulatory or legislative pieces that are needed above and beyond resourcing to try to help support that initiative that you have committed to us publicly to do. Can I ask around bees? This committee has put up a recommendation for CFIA to revisit its bee policy, particularly around the importation of bees. There is a bit of a split, I would say, in the industry between kind of local honeybee production and their associations, but certainly from pollinators' perspective, we do allow for the importation of queen bees from California. Has CFIA updated any of its guidance or its process around the importation of bees, particularly from the state of California, in packaged form?
In regards to the honeybees, you are correct that there are currently restrictions in place. We are in the process of completing a risk assessment. In fact, it's out for consultation. This is specific for honeybees, both queens and packages. We do allow importation from a variety of countries right now. Specifically on pollinators, it is also something that we are assessing to determine whether or not we can add the importation of pollinators from other countries. I know that there was some issues last pollination season, in particular on the East Coast, and we did work with some of the importers to try to find a way to make sure that we assess where these pollinators are coming from. And in fact, I think in some cases they were coming from Mexico. And we're definitely seized by this to ensure that there's no negative impacts for the upcoming season.
And when will we expect that assessment and decision to be made by CFIA? Do you have a timeline?
So the assessment on the honeybees, I understand that consultation is currently public, and there's a 60-day consultation period. That is really, we're consulting on the risk assessment that's been put out and how the proposals that would be put forward to determine how those risks can be mitigated and managed in order to look at adding more countries in the way of honeybees. And on the pollinators, I don't have a timeline. I'd have to get back to the committee on that one.
If you could table that. Just quickly to the folks at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, again, thank you for the work that you do. Perhaps, Deputy Minister Hansen, I was surprised you didn't get more questions on Canada-U.S. relationship, given some of the threats of tariffs and obviously the work that it needs to be done by the government. I'm wondering, is there work being done within the department on cross-border mutual benefits? I think there are things that we can do, whether it be aligning up on certain harmonization of policies where it makes sense for farmers in Canada and the United States. Is there some scoping work being done by your ministry on things of mutual benefit between the industries on Canada-U.S., just as we start to, I think, take an even deeper look at this relationship in the days ahead?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, so I mean, there's the kind of the built-in elements of the shared interests of the two countries. As members of this committee will know well, we are a key export and import destination for one another, and up to and including the fact that livestock will often travel too across the border. So there's a great deal of supply chain mutual dependency here. On the issue of regulatory collaboration, this is always an ongoing issue, both with us, but also there is a formal kind of regulatory alignment process, ongoing work that's led by the Treasury Board working with the United States on those issues as well.
I don't want to presuppose where we may go in January, but this could be an interesting area of study in terms of cross-border collaboration, particularly on the harmonization piece around regulatory, and certainly for our folks at CFIA, I know there's a lot of good working. I think we'd love to be able to encourage that work to even continue deeper. Thank you, colleagues, for the indulgence for a round of questions. I will, on your behalf, thank our public servants for your work on behalf of Canadian agriculture, so thank you for appearing today.
The fertilizer letter on the Solio, did we come to a decision on that?
I was not here on Thursday, as you know, but I will ask my clerk. She is away. We are meeting on Thursday,
Okay.
so I will make sure in the
Can we just
interim
leave a little
period
time
that,
there then?
Yep,
Okay.
I will make sure we set aside time. And that's a good reminder, colleagues. We will see you Thursday on Rail Study. Wait, before we go, geez, we better approve the estimates. That's like why I guess we're ultimately here. I could get fired as the chair. That close. You should have let me hit the gavel. First of all, I'll ask for unanimous consent to consolidate the vote. I assume that won't be a problem, and I presume it'll be on division. Okay, and shall the chair report back to the House? I suspect that you want, maybe on division. All right, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned, not suspended. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.